Welcome back, everybody. I'm glad you are able to return. We last time what we did was we created a, technique for being able to hash a password before we stored it, which was able to protect the password. So that's sort of half the battle. The whole purpose of logging in is that you normally want to restrict access to, for instance, these endpoints unless a user is logged in. And so, in order to do that, we have to create some kind of middleware that will check and make sure that someone's logged in before we allow them to go on to these different routes. And there's typically two common ways that are done modern, with modern web app development. One is using JSON web tokens, and the other is using a session with a cookie that will store that information. So today we're going to talk about creating a session using cookies in order to track if a user is logged in and to restrict or allow access to certain endpoints. And so a session is a common method that allows a server to store information about a client. And then that information can be used for a variety of different purposes. But for what we want to use it for is we want to use it to persist authentication information so that every time a user wants to go to one of these endpoints, we don't have to constantly resend the user's credentials to prove that they are who they say they are. Middleware is basically a function that you insert, for instance, right like in here, right before it goes to the router, you can insert a function that'll interrupt and go right in front of it, and that will either allow you to continue on to these routes or to stop them dead cold and send back a message. And there's all different kinds of middleware. Later on, towards the end of the series, I'm going to talk about cores and Helmet and some of the other middleware that you can use. But for our intent purposes, we're going to use some middleware that is going to create a session for us, create a cookie, and then use it to persist user authentication so that they can have access to endpoints. And so, what is a cookie? What is a session? Think of it kind of like your gym. So when I go to the gym, even though I'm not going to the gym right now because all the gyms are closed, but when the gyms open back up again and I go to my gym, I take my little gym card or my little card and I walk into the gym. And in order for me to get into the gym and get to the workout equipment, I have to present a card that will prove that I'm a member. And so all of my information isn't kept on my card. The only thing that's kept on my gym card is a number. And when I flash that number in front of their little machine, then they're going to take my number and then look up my information on their server, and that'll prove who I am. And so a cookie is basically something that is created by the server, and and then the server sends it back to the client, and then the client, on every request that is made, that cookie goes back and forth between them, and that is the way that the user's requests know that this user is allowed to this particular resource. Once again, the cookie is created by the server and is then sent back with the response object. And so these are, once again, a lot of words. Let me just start to write some code, and then I'll explain it as I go. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to use a library that is going to handle the session logic for us. There's lots of them out there. The one I'm going to use is Express Session in NPM here. There's one also, Express Sessions, plural, but the one that I'm going to use is Express Session singular. So I am going to add that, yarn add express dash session, and add that. And now the server needs to make use of that, so I am going to require it. I guess I'll put it right here. Const session equals require express. Here it is down here. Express session. Boom. And now anything that we require, we need to use. And so I'll just put it after the JSON here. I'll say server.use session, and we have to pass it a configuration object. We'll call it session config. We have to pass it a configuration object. And we'll create that configuration object. How about right in here? And so I'll explain this configuration object as I create it. So session config equals, and it's an object. There we go. It's an object. And so there are 5 different parts of this object that I'm going to show you. There might be more, but these are the 5 that I use whenever I create a session. And the first one is we can give our cookie a name. If the cookie isn't given a name, I believe the name is automatically given of SID for session ID. But you can also give it a name, and so I'm going to name this cookie. I don't know, what's a good cookie name? How about the cookie monster? Monster. I'm going to name the cookie monster. That way, when we do a console log later on of the session object, we'll see that the name returned back when the cookie is created, that it's given the name of monster. And then we want to give our cookie a secret. This is a secret that you keep track of, that is unique and that you wouldn't want to get out, because if the secret got out, then a hacker could tear apart your cookie. So this is normally, so I'll say secret, and for testing you can type whatever your secret is right in here, but it's best to put the secret in your env file here. Remember, because the contents of this file do not get pushed up to GitHub, and that way your secret won't get pushed up with your code to GitHub. So I'm going to say process.env.secret. And so because I did that, I got to go to the env file and create a secret. So let's go and use this, in secret equals, I can, I don't know, what's a good, give me cake or give me death. Give me cake or give me death. There we go. That's a secret. I'm going to save that file, close it. And so that's our secret. One of these things, one thing in passing, I want to talk about env files in general. If you're working on a project with other people and you push your code up to GitHub, and then they're going to pull it down into their machine, you have to remember the env file isn't going to get pushed up, so they're going to lose what these values are. And so you have to have a way on your team of communicating these values that's secure, so that your fellow developer that might want to work on some code that you pushed up to GitHub and they pull down, now they can create an env file. One of the first things they should do after they clone your code, fork and clone it, is they should create an env file, and I know, like on our development team, we use Slack, and in our development environment, we have a protected channel where the three or four of us that might be working on a project, the last project I worked on, the main developer, she would push up code, and I would say, hey, what are your environment variables? I need a list of that, and she would get that to me in Slack, in the company's protected Slack channel, and so anyway, you could have put the secret just straight right in here, but once again, that's going to get pushed up to GitHub, and you don't want that. So anyway, enough about secrets. There we go. So we have to have a secret, and now we got to create the cookie object itself. So it's called, no doubt, cookie, and it's an object. So this stuff kind of this gave the cookie a name. This is a secret. And now this, we're going to describe the cookie. We can set a time period that the cookie is good for. 5 days, a week, an hour, whatever. Max age, and this is in milliseconds. So I'm going to say 1,000. So that's 1 second times 60. Now that's a minute times 6. How about 60? We'll just make this cookie good for an hour. So now this is a cookie. Let me write notes. Name of the cookie. Secret that makes the cookie activate, I guess. Activate. Effective. Time span of the cookie. Like, for instance, when I log into my bank, it's like I might log in and then I might go to another screen real quick and come back, and it's like a minute later I'm logged out. So however they do their authentication or cookies, or I don't know what technology the bank is using, whether it's a JSON web token or cookies or a combination of the two. They have their time periods set to be very, very short. So if they don't detect any activity, they log you out. Secure. This means, what this means, I got to put a comma because this is an object. There we go. This means, do you require them to log in over HTTPS in order for the cookie to be valid? So for development, while we're working on our local host mode, obviously we're not in an HTTPS environment. But once you go into production, then you would want to set this flag to true. But for development, so for production, set to true for HTTPS only access. There we go. And then the other key value pair in this cookie object is HTTP only. And what this means is, can JavaScript get to it? And you should say, if this is set to false, then JavaScript can get to it. You don't want that. You don't want people to be able to kind of get at your cookie from JavaScript. That would make it dangerous for hackers who are JavaScript geniuses to be able to get at it. So we want to set this to true. True means no access from JavaScript. And then that's good for the cookie. And then there's another thing to the session configuration. We want to say resave. In other words, how you want to constantly resave this every time you go back and forth? No, there's no need to resave it. I imagine some real sophisticated cookies where they're doing a lot more than just what we're using it for, just to persist a user to show that they're authenticated, they might want to set this value to something else, but we're going to say false. And then save uninitialized. This is, we save this to true. What this means is, this means go ahead and save the cookie automatically without requiring the user to accept. But when you go into production, this has to be set to false due to what's called GDPR laws. I believe these laws were, don't quote me if I'm wrong, but I think these laws are initiated in the European Union. They didn't, they made laws that programs couldn't save cookies without a user's implied consent. And so, but when we're in development, we're just going to go ahead and save the cookie no matter what, because we're in development. But once you go into production, then you want to set this to false, and then the client side, whether it's React or Angular or whatever, then the client side would have to put up some kind of a form or saying, you know, are you going to, this site stores cookies, do you accept, yes or no, or however your client side development team wants to handle that, and then they will send a value that'll set this value here. So that's what this is. GDPR laws. User has to give consent. All right. So this is the session configuration object, and it gets passed to the session. The server is going to create a session. It's going to create an object on the server. Our software here, Express Session, is going to handle all of that for us. It's going to handle storing this information, and it's also going to handle sending it back to the endpoints back and forth automatically, so we don't really have to do a whole lot besides just use it and require it. And so now we have a session, but now how do we make use of it? So one of the things we need to do is, let me go to the user routes. Okay, so right now I have, let me close my terminal real quick here. Right now I have a register endpoint, a login endpoint, and then where you can start getting at data. What I really want to do is make these first two endpoints are kind of concerned with adding a new user and logging in. Only after you've been added and logged in here in the login endpoint should you be able to have access to this endpoint. And for that matter, either of these endpoints, the lessons and the messages that we did. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to create another split and re-engineer this code just a little bit. I'm going to create an auth folder. So go down here, I'm going to create a new folder in the root called auth. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy everything through, let me see, everything from my login endpoint up. I'm going to copy, make sure I got it all. Yep, I'm going to copy it, and I'm going to go in this auth file and create a new file called authentication.js. Yeah, I guess that's a good name. And then I'm going to paste that in here. And all this is good. And then I'm going to go back to our user routes. And we don't need bcrypt because bcrypt is now in that auth file. We don't need the register route or the login route. So we're gonna delete these. And so now this is truly just a the routes to the data. And I'm going to hit save on this. I'm going to go to the authentication one. I got to do a module.exports at the bottom down here. Module.export equals router. There we go. Save that. Make sure everything looks good with this users. Looks good. So the user route still works good. Now that we just changed the authentication, we made it basically a new router. You know what? I don't want to call this authentication. Let me rename this. I want to call this, rename. I want to call it auth routes. Auth routes. How about that? Auth routes. There we go. That's better. And so now we have our auth routes in a different place. So we need to go to server and add auth routes. So const, we'll call it auth router equals require. We got to go up and out to auth \auth routes. And now I need to do a server.use. Let me just put it here, server.use. And what endpoint do we want to give after localhost 5000? We'll call it /API/auth. That sounds good, /API/auth. So then the registration endpoint will be localhost 5000 /API/auth/registration, and login will be /API/auth/login. And then this is to the auth router up there. So auth router. And so now hit save. Make sure I did that right. Everything looks good. And so now, just to make sure, I just did a lot of changes right there. I just kind of reconfigured my code. So let me get a terminal going real quick here. Start my server, yarn server, and just register a user and make sure that everything still works. All right, server running. Let me go to Insomnia real quick. Register. Let me see. Patty 1 2 3 4 pass. Oh, good. Let's do a find all users. And there's Patty down there. Good. So I've obviously are refactoring our code, moving the auth and login out of the user routes into their own routes. Everything's still wired up. Everything's still working. Good to go. Let me just explain this little error. Returning is not supported by SQLite and will not have any effect. If you recall, real quick, in our dbconfig file, our models in our helpers, for Postgres, we had to return a value. That's what this SQLite doesn't require this, and it'll just kind of ignore it. It's not going to make the code break, but that's what this error is. We had to put this stuff in here like this specifically due to Postgres. And so basically it's saying insert a user and return this information. And so that's what this little error code, returning is not supported by SQLite 3, but it won't have any effect. So anyway, if any of you were wondering, that's what that's all about. Okay, so now what I need to do is what our goal is we want to say you don't have access to any of these three routes until you're registered and logged in. And so we do that using the concept of middleware. And so what middleware is it's a process that can run, that can check and either allow you to continue on through, or it can stop you, or it can add things to the response object. Basically, middleware can do all kinds of different things. And we're going to use middleware to say, hey, let's let's create a middleware called restricted. That's a good name. And we're going to place it right in here. And in here, just copy this. And in here, and in here. And you can't get to any of this information unless this allows it. So let's go create this, and I'll show you how it works. And so in our auth folder, let's create a new file called restricted-middleware.js. And so this basically module.exports equals, and basically it's something that it gets inserted in the middle, and it can allow you to continue, or it can stop, or it can add to a response object. So right now we're going to say we have to have the so we have the rec, res, but for middleware we need 3. So I call them the 3 amigos. So the 3 amigos are rec, res, and next, and they're needed for middleware. And so basically this middleware that's going to run, so anytime you go to localhost 5000/API/lessons, it's going to go run this first. And so this file right here, for right now, I'm just going to put next. And this will just allow things to go right on through. In other words, it's going to go, when it goes to this file, it's going to go to this file right here, and it's going to say, oh, continue on. And then that'll allow it to then continue on to the router just like normal. So let's save this file. We have to, because we have it here, we have to go bring it in up top. So let's do a const restricted equals require, and it's single quotes auth/restricted middleware. There we go. So we hit save. And so what this is going to do, this is going to, anytime you go to these routes, it's going to then go run the logic that's in here. And for right now, we're just saying go to next. And there it is. Matter of fact, let's console.log the rec.session object, and let's give it a name, session object, and hit save. Go back here, make sure everything looks good here. And so now let's go make a request, and let's look at that console log. Right now, it should allow you because it's not doing anything. So let's log in. So who did I register? I registered Patty with 1234 pass. So let's log in with Patty. Log in, and then let's go. So now when I try to run, so for instance, and get all the users, it's going to run this restricted file. So let me go to Insomnia and run the users. That's going to run that users route. So let me hit send. It'll run it, but let's go look at our console log. You should have a console log, and here it is down below. And here is a session object. And see, it's just like we created in the server up here. See, cookie, path, expires in an hour, original max age in milliseconds, HTTP only true. So basically, here's our session object, basically, which is pretty cool. So how do we now use our middleware to actually restrict access unless you're truly logged in? And so what we do is we're going to go back to that restricted middleware, and we're going to add some logic in here now. So I want to say if, let me see. First, you have to have. Let me get rid of everything here. Think better. I'm going to say if rec.session, if there is a session and there is a rec.session.user. So right now there isn't a rec.session.user. We have a session, but there's no user attached to it. So one of the cool things about the session is you can add items to the session. Right now, we just created a cookie, but we also want to add to this. We want to add to this object the user information that proves that the user is logged in. And so I'm going to show you how to do that in the logout endpoint, but let's write the logic right here. So right now, if there's a session, and right now we have that, but now if there's a user in key value pair also located in that session, and right now there isn't. Right now there's just a cookie. And if there's a user, then we're going to say continue on. You're logged in. But if there's not both of these true, then let's return a res.status of 401.json that says message, I don't know, sorry dudette, can't let you in. Whatever, cannot, because I have this, cannot let you in. And so here, server, so let me go back to server. We logged in. We have a session object. We have a cookie. And then we went, after we logged in, we went and used this endpoint. We tried to do a get, and it ran this piece of middleware. And right now the middleware just allowed you to go through. But now we're saying you have to have this user object attached to this. So how do we attach it to this when a person logs in? Because if this information isn't attached to the cookie, then when I go to the gym and present my card, they're going to say, sorry, I don't have that number in my gym system. I can't let you into the gym. This basically kind of proves that you have access to the resource endpoints. So what we're going to do is we're going to go to the auth routes where you register. So it's not on the register endpoint that we're so much concerned, because register is good. It's in the login endpoint. And so in the login, what we want to do is we want to someplace create that user object, this right here, so that when a person goes to try to do a get, this object exists and it allows them through. And so in order to do that, we're going to try to find a good spot in this login in order to do that. And where probably would be a good spot for that? I think probably right before you return the status. So if a person is successfully logged in and their passwords jibe, and if they pass this if statement qualification, then right in here, let's let's create that rec session user object. And basically, you can just create it rec.session.user. See, that's what it's looking for. Rec.session.user equals, and it's an object, and we'll say ID, user.id, and maybe username is equal to user.username. And now when a person logs in, it's going to add this, a user key value pair to the session object that we created here, and then it will fulfill this if statement and then go next, which will allow you to go right on the endpoint. But if they both don't exist, then it won't allow it. So let's save that. Let's save this, hit save, and let's go try to go to one of those endpoints without logging in, because if you don't log in, it doesn't create this object here. So let's go to Insomnia. Let's, I don't know who's logged in and who's logged out. You know what, let me kill the server, make sure everybody's logged out. So Control C, and then yarn server. That'll start it up again. There we go. Everybody's logged out. So now let me just go and try to find all users without logging in. And see, sorry, cannot let you in. I should probably have written a more professional message like, you need to be logged in. You need to be, you need to register and log in or whatever. But anyway, but now let's log in. So Patty 1234 pass. Let's log in. Welcome Patty. Now let's try to find all users, and we get all the users. And what's more, did I leave that console log in our middleware? Oh, I took it out. Darn it. You know what? Let me do that again and add the console log. Console.log. You know what? I have a cool little CLO. There we go. Where rec.session. There we go. Let's console log that, and let's log in with who was one of our other users? Ethan. I'll log in with Ethan. Ethan's logged in. Let's go look at the console log. Oh, I didn't hit the endpoint. Whoops. Let's go to the endpoint now and do a find all users. It gets all the users. Let's go look at the console log. And so now here's the session that we had before, but notice, see, it added a user object to it. And this middleware right up here is saying that this has to exist before I'll allow you to continue on to even have access to this router. If this condition doesn't, if this doesn't pass, then I can't let you have access to any of these resources. And that's how websites restrict access. And this restricted middleware there can be a lot more logic in here. Like, imagine if you're a university, they might have certain endpoints that instructors can go to, and certain endpoints that students can go to, and certain endpoints that employees can go to, and things like that. So the logic in here can get a lot more robust. But I think you get the message. Basically, we created a middleware that basically we stick in the middle of this route. We're going to this endpoint to get to this resource, and this says you got to go through me first. And if you pass, everything's good to go. And so you notice we didn't have to add any logic really to these three endpoints. These three endpoints, we didn't touch it. Didn't touch it at all. Any router endpoints you write that you want to restrict, all you got to do is write your cool little your restricted middleware here, and then we put in our auth routes in the login. We created, when a person logs in, then we created what kind of user. Imagine if so. In other words, imagine on this login, we could check on the database if you're a student or an instructor. We could have added to this, like status, student, or whatever. You can add anything you want to this rec.session.user in order to fortify your logic to restrict users to specific endpoints. And that is how we use restricted middleware in sessions and set a cookie. The cookie was created by the server, and basically the session automatically goes back and forth. The middleware express session handles that for us, and yeah. So in the next video, we're gonna talk about a slightly different way that this is done using JSON web tokens. But this is a very popular method using cookies and sessions, and I hope you join me in the next video. Oh, wait a minute! Before we go, I would be remiss if I didn't write a logout endpoint. Let's write a quick logout endpoint. Let's create an endpoint that allows you to log out, and I'll show you the method that Express Session gives us for that. So let's do a router.get logout. So it's going to be any to localhost 5000 / API / auth / logout. And we're going to do rec res homies, and say if rec.session, if the one exists, like rec.session right here, if rec.session, then we simply say rec.session.destroy. And we can return an error if for some reason it doesn't allow you. I've never seen it not destroy the session, but if for some reason it doesn't work, probably good practice to just error. So we could say if error res.status of something went wrong trying to log out .json. You can check it out anytime you like, but you can never leave. Didn't put a quote over here. Quote, gotta get rid of the double one. Flip. Let me see. Oh, message. Right here. You can check it anytime you like. If that else, let me see. Just direct.session, just .destroy. If error, let me see. Then I think else. Put this. I just want to make sure I had the else in the right place. Else res dot status of 200 dot JSON of successfully logged out. And then we got to have a catch. In other words, if it doesn't find a session at all, then I guess we need to have another else. If rec.session else res.status of 200.json message not logged in, or who are you, or whatever message you want to say. In other words, there was no session to destroy. You're already logged out. So and that looks good. Let's save it real quick. Let's test it. Let's go to Insomnia. Let's log in. Log in. Now let's log out. Cannot post API logout. Let's see. Let's go see what's going on here. Oh, did I have the right /API/auth/logout? Cannot. Oh, I made it a post. Dir. It's a get. It's a get. Successfully logged out. There we go. Yeah. Yeah, when you log in, obviously it's a post because you're sending information. But when you log out, you basically just call. It's a get right here. And so basically, yeah, there's how you write a logout endpoint. So now you can. So now the client, they have a little logout button, and then it runs this endpoint right here. All right. So in the next video, we will talk about JSON Web Tokens, which is a different way that is traditionally used to authenticate a user and to prove that they're logged in and everything like that. But I'm glad you could join me, and I hope you join me in the next video. Thank you.